Welcome to a Wonder Junkie podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Anderson.
Nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows. Nobody has the faintest idea. The best guesses are lies. You may be sure of it.
Dr. Habib, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me, Ryan.
Absolutely. I discovered your work not too long ago, maybe a month or two ago, from a friend at work at the fire department who is a big part of our mental health team. And his name's Dave Kirk. He sent me a video of yours and it intrigued me. So I went down your rabbit hole a little bit. And I love what you're doing. And I've been learning about the vagus nerve and some of the things you're talking about for some time, but not to the depth that you seem to be in the field. So I'm excited to learn what you're doing and talk a little bit about your field, your book, and everything else in between.
Love it. Yeah, this sounds great. I'm excited to share with you and with your audience and see if we can help some people improve their health.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I know it's a huge, important subject, but a lot of people have never even really heard much about the subject. So I'd like to maybe just have you describe what it is, how you got involved, and why it's something that you've devoted your life force energy into. So,
yeah, it's a great question. The vagus nerve, for me, it really stuck out. It really stuck out when I remember in high school, even when I was taking a look at where I wanted to be, what I wanted to do for my life. And I always knew I was going to be in healthcare in some capacity. And neuroanatomy really stuck out to me. I was very interested in the brain, how the brain functioned, how the brain and the body communicate in the way that they do. And in my kind of pattern and in my time of discovery, I found that there was a very unique structure connecting the brain and the body. And I think it's a bit of a misnomer to say that the brain and the body are not connected. They are incapable of being broken apart, right? Like they have to be working together. But the brain is where a lot of the decisions are made in our body, and then the decisions and that information is communicated to all of the different organs and all of the different cells in our bodies. And we've often kind of thought that the information passage occurs through the spinal cord because we've got the spine protecting the spinal cord containing the vast, vast majority of neurons that connect the brain to all of the other organs and tissues of the body, all reside within the spinal cord. But there's one set of nerves that was different than this. It didn't come out through the spinal cord. It went alongside some very important structures, which we'll talk about in the neck. And then it connected to essentially every single organ in the body, and that was the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is our 10th cranial nerve, and we call it the vagus nerve when in reality there's two. We've got one on each side. These structures come out of the brainstem, and we've got 12 pairs of these cranial nerves. So most of these cranial nerves stay within the head and the neck area, primarily within the head. Things like the optic nerve, the facial nerve, the trigeminal nerve, they all stay in and around the head and the neck. So they're the ones that are dilating our pupils and taking in vision and smell and all of these things. But the 10th pair of these nerves was different. It kind of stuck out. It went down through the neck, and then it was the only cranial nerve that left the head cavity, really. And then it attached to virtually every single organ. And when I say every single organ, I'm not being kind of facetious about this. It is absolutely connected to the heart, the lungs, the kidney, the stomach, the esophagus, the spleen, the liver, the entire digestive tract. It has direct connections to every single one of those organs. That is unique within the body. Nothing is like the vagus nerve. And that's in fact why it's called the vagus nerve. Vagus comes from the root word vague, which means wandering, which means that anatomically, when it was being discovered, they figured out that this nerve didn't have a particular path. It just went everywhere. It was vague. They were unsure as to why it went everywhere that it did. And anatomically speaking, obviously we, at this point, have figured out a little bit more about it. But anatomically speaking, because it was so vague, that was the nerve name that they gave it. And over the last 20, 25 years in our modern history, we've actually discovered that the role of this nerve is to control inflammation in the body. We were taught, and most medical practitioners out there will tell you, when you hear the vagus nerve, you think parasympathetic nervous system. And we'll get into what that means. But essentially, it's the rest digest system, the opposite of the fight or flight system. But that explanation just wasn't enough for me. Why would this unique structure within the body be just simply involved in the rest digest piece? It doesn't make a lot of sense. It didn't feel complete. And over the last 20, 25 years, we've realized that it is the communication tool for the immune system. It's how the immune system and the brain talk to one another. And the immune system has cells that are present in every single organ of the body. And this is where the missing link is. We often think of the immune system as being our protective system, which it is, but it does way more than that, right? So the protection piece of the immune system is one component of its work. The job of the vagus nerve is to tell those immune cells whether or not they need to be in an active fight situation or whether they're in a rest, digest, and recover situation, because the immune system cells are actually the type of cells that produce us as people. They help to manage and grow the different organs as we're developing. They maintain the function of these organs as we live. And as we eventually pass, it's the immune system that is incapable of maintaining its function. This is the key thing to understand. The job of the vagus nerve is to communicate with the immune system present in every single organ of the body. I know I've gone way down the rabbit hole here right off the bat, but I think it's an important thing to understand. The vagus nerve's role is connecting to the immune system, period.
Awesome. No, I love going down deep the rabbit hole, but it's nice the way you articulate it. And it's also nice to get back to some of the fundamentals of where is it located for someone to touch it. I've seen you reach up and touch beyond your
Yes,
carotid artery there, like you're checking your pulse, right?
that's
And then,
exactly right.
things that are very practical. I'd love to get into some of what your book ends up being, which it seems I did not read your book because it's been so close of an interview by the time we met, but I will love to in the future. And it looks like the scaffolding is teaching people how to have healthy vagus nerve fundamentals. And some of the
Absolutely.
fundamentals obviously have to do with learning breathing techniques and increasing heart rate variability, things of that nature. So
Yeah.
maybe we can start by some of the practicalities so that people can take home some cliff notes as to like, well, this is a deep rabbit hole. What can I do and what can I get from this podcast on the fundamental level?
It's a great question. The first question we really have to ask ourselves is, why is the vagus nerve breaking down in the first place? So all nerves have very similar function. If you don't use it, you lose it. Those nerves will break down. They're going to become dysfunctional. They're not going to send information to the tissues that they're supposed to. And that's really important to understand. So in the same way that if you don't, let's say, for example, for the sake of ease in understanding this example, if we don't work out our biceps, we're not going to grow our biceps. But it's not the biceps that we're trying to grow with that exercise. It's actually the neural connection to the biceps, from the brain to the bicep. So if I don't do bicep curls, or if I don't lift heavy things, that function is going to be depleted. The nerve connections are going to be minimized, and the ability to connect from brain to that particular muscle is going to be depleted. In the same exact way, if we don't have that brain-body connection functioning at a high level, we're never going to be able to send these pieces of information up and down really effectively. So the question that we're asking ourselves is, why would this particular nerve that's connected to essentially every single organ in our body have dysfunction or not have the ability to send this information? Taking a step back from that, we say, okay, well, where is the information passed on the vagus nerve? Because we often think brain to body, but 80% of the information on the vagus nerve is from the body up to the brain. It's actually sending information from the gut via the microbiome, from the heart, from the liver, from the lungs, up to the brain. We're getting the information to the brain. What this means is we have 4 lanes of highway going upwards to our brain and only 1 lane coming down. Okay? So the vast majority of information is making its way up. So there needs to be an insight into what could be breaking this particular connection down? Why would this information be pushed towards neural disconnection? And the answer is we're straining that nerve a lot. Okay. And the strain for this nerve comes from stress. Stress is kind of this big overarching word that causes vagus nerve dysfunction. But in the book, and we'll break it down here as well, but in the book, I break down the 4 different areas of stress that, or the types of stress that cause vagus nerve dysfunction to occur in the first place. So first off, we have what we think of as stress, which is kind of day-to-day stressors. Okay, these are, the financial challenges, the relationship challenges, the getting the kids out of the house in the morning and get them to school, or dealing with traffic and maneuvering through kind of somebody cutting you off in traffic, or all of the little annoyances that kind of chip away at your day and kind of push you to feel more stressed or not, right? So that's going to be the first type of stressor that really pushes us into this area where we feel more stressed, where we feel less capable of handling or being resilient to stressors. The second area is psychological stress, and this is a big one. Now, a lot of people will say, yeah, this makes a lot of sense because, if there's an adverse childhood event, or if there's sexual trauma, or if there's some sort of major traumatic incident that somebody experiences, a loss of a loved one, loss of a parent, major, victim of a crime, things like that, where they feel like their safety has been decreased. They no longer feel safe in either certain situations or overall. That's psychological trauma. In a situation like yours, and you're working with a lot of firefighters, we see this with a lot of first responders, right? Because fortunately we have you, but unfortunately first responders see some of the worst things in their daily lives. I have a friend who we were chatting about earlier, who is a firefighter, and he's told me stories of things that he's seen, fires that have occurred, and like the visualization of kind of the worst of humanity, or the worst of what can happen to humans. Those are major traumatic stressors. And what they do is they decrease our ability to feel safe. And the perception of safety is the major driver that pushes us to turn our vagus nerves on. So psychological stressors, these things that trigger almost a PTSD type of reaction, or post-traumatic stress type of reaction, these are the things that in major quantities push our vagus nerve function down. Okay. So it can be a single major event that pushes us into a particular area or a particular situation that causes this feeling, or it can be numerous smaller ones, depending on person's situation. So psychological stress is number 2. Then we've got physical stress. Now, physical stress can be one of 2 things. It can be either too much physical activity or too little physical activity. So a lack of movement or too much movement. Okay. Not exercising enough. We know sedentary lifestyles have a major stressful effect. They're going to trigger some biochemical changes within the body, leading to increased abdominal fat and kind of metabolic dysfunction. We know that too much physical trauma or physical activity is going to overdo it. Like if somebody runs 4 marathons in a day, that's a lot, right? So your body's going to break down. So we need to find that balance. And each individual is going to have a good level of balance where we want to be in that middle ground with enough physical movement, but also physical recovery taking place. And so physical stress, depending on what your lifestyle is going to be a major piece there. The last one is biochemical stress. And this is where functional medicine practitioners such as myself are able to really identify bigger changes. So those 4 areas are the things that need to be assessed. So when we look at biochemical stress, what we're looking at is either overexposure to too many toxic burdens on our body, pesticides, herbicides, sugars, poor quality fats, poor quality dietary intake. We're exposed to thousands of chemicals, hundreds and thousands of chemicals on a daily basis, from things that are on our clothing to on our couches to exhaust fumes to everything, right? So these are physical exposures or biochemical exposures that we want to minimize. And then on top of that, we've got the lack of the good nutrients that need to be getting into our bodies. So potentially a lack of B vitamins or amino acids or specific vitamins and minerals that need to be in to ensure that we have the tools for our cells to do their jobs. And if you don't have the tools to do your job, as a firefighter, if you don't have the specific tools that you need, like you don't have your hose, you don't have your axe, you're not going to be able to complete the job that needs to be completed. So every cell in the body requires specific things. Metabolically, it requires certain things from a protein growth perspective, protein production perspective. So if we lack those nutrients, that's going to be a major biochemical stressor as well. So those four areas, just to overview them once again, the daily stressors, the psychological stressors, the physical stressors, and the biochemical stressors.
I like
Each
that.
individual has these one of these four, or any one of these four, in certain levels that are causing a breakdown of potentially vagus nerve function. Okay.
Awesome.
So those are the things that we need to assess. And on an individual basis, I love for people to be able to kind of do a bit of an inventory and say, yeah, you know what, there's a lot of psychological trauma that I've experienced in my past, or, I maybe am a little too sedentary or something along those lines. So that way we can try to identify where we can make changes on those stressors and start to support the elimination of those stressors into uh, being more beneficial, or even habit changes that can actually turn into positive lifestyle factors.
Yep. And I like the idea of good and bad stress too being a part of
Yes,
that
absolutely.
conversation, because so many times it's more about consciously inducing stress at certain times to get rid of stress. And there's different
Yes,
ways, of course, of doing that. People are getting into the cold or the heat,
exactly.
stimulating mitochondrial health. And then it's like a lot of the conversation comes back to nervous system management, which is actually what human beings have to do at the core level. And it seems
100%.
like, as a first responder myself, I tell the newer guys, I wish I would have been told this when I was younger, but our job, first and foremost, is to just manage our nervous systems. It's not like we're very effective on high stress incidents if we can't even manage our own ecosystem. And so a
Totally.
lot of that comes down to like preventative and learning a lot of different techniques about the breath. And as silly and as woo as it sounds on the surface level, the breath is the foundation and the anchor to learn how to downregulate the nervous system and to be more present and to slow everything down way before we ever get to the high stress incident. This is more of like
100%.
cultivating a relationship with it. So I always tell people we're more nervous system managers than anything, because otherwise we have no effect on the environment or the emergency we're trying to influence, because it's so contagious. If
That's
I'm caught
exactly
up in
right.
the stress and I'm full of chaos and I come to work in that state, I'm pretty much a contagion in that way. And that will ripple into every call and every incident thereforth. And then it compounds over time. And so I think a lot of the PTSD and stuff is just a dysregulated nervous system over long periods of time. And so it's cool to hear you putting out this type of educational material to help us learn from the front end too, the preventative stuff that we can do so that we're never in that predicament in the future. And yeah, I just wanted to bring that forth.
You've put it in perfect words there, because nervous system management is literally being able to shift between that fight or flight state or the rest, digest, recover state. And the vagus nerve is where we sit in that rest, digest, recover state. If we can turn on our vagus nerves, get that signaling uh, area up and running and good and strong and functional, what that does is it teaches us to handle those stressors in a different way. And what you said about good and bad stress there, I love that, because I talk about eustress and distress. Eustress being good stress, EU, and distress being negative stress. And it comes down to your perception of the stress, because all of these things are happening around us, right? You can be in the most calm situation and feel entirely stressed, or you can be in the most chaotic situation and feel entirely calm because of how you perceive that situation in a slightly different manner, right? So this is where nervous system regulation comes down to is, have I taught myself to perceive stress in a positive or negative way, or be able to step back, become as objective as possible in that situation, take in the situation and identify what needs to happen in this moment in order to A, ensure safety, and B, ensure survival, right? and then be able to do those things, complete those tasks while then working on whatever that task is. Now, in a first responder situation, that's on the highest possible level, right? We're sitting. I luckily have not been in a situation where I've had first responders that I've had to call. I've been a lifeguard. I've had kind of, the few moments of these things happening, but I don't have it happen on a regular basis. I have so much respect for first responders. It's something that I've been lucky enough to be close enough to some first responders, like one of my really great friends, Brandon Evans, who runs Fire to Light, which we'll talk about later as well. But just being able to understand the thought process of a first responder really helps me feel like I understand what needs to be done. I've been in emergency room situations. I've had people have heart attacks right in front of me, and was a SARS screener, and there was chaos that ensued in hospitals. So I understand this, and I think in order to be the best possible first responder, in order to be the best possible version of yourself in whatever situation it is, whether you're a first responder or not, the key is, can you take a moment and regulate your nervous system acutely in the moment when it needs to be regulated, and determine, is this a threat to my survival, or is it something that I can manage and support and create this rest, digest, recover process within? And you're exactly right that the breath is the key factor here. So the breath is how we turn on these different systems. And so if at baseline we're not breathing really well, and then a stressful situation occurs, we're already primed towards the fight or flight side of things. And if we're really primed and really good at being in that rest, digest, recover situation because our breathing patterns are down and strong and powerful, then imagine how strong and powerful your breath is when you're in those situations. Okay,
I
so
agree.
breath control dictates nervous system regulation. The breath is the key to regulating the nervous system. You're absolutely correct on that. And so to dig into that, identifying where you're at with your breath. Are you a nose breather or a mouth breather? Right? Are you breathing through your chest, or are you breathing with your belly? That's a sign that whether it's diaphragmatic breathing or chest breathing. When we breathe through our chest, that is a signal to turn on our sympathetic nervous system and go into that fight or flight state more readily. Versus if we're a belly breather, which is why we say, take a deep breath, take a belly breath. That pushes us into that parasympathetic rest, digest, recover state. So that breath needs to happen. So the breath needs to be nasal. It needs to be diaphragmatic, not chest, but belly breathing. And then it needs to be longer exhales. Shorter inhale, longer exhale. That pattern shifts us between sympathetic and parasympathetic. And that is actually what creates heart rate variability, which we'll get to in a second. But shorter inhale, longer exhale on a ratio side of things. So 3 seconds in, 6 seconds out, or 4, 7, 8, which is a great pattern as well. 4-second inhale through the nose, 7-second hold, 8-second exhale, nose or mouth, whatever works better for you. I know a lot of people like pursed lip breathing. What that does is it slows or extends the time that we're in a particular exhale pattern, and that will turn on the parasympathetic. So as we inhale, our heart rate increases. We go into a sympathetic state a little bit more. As we exhale, our heart rate decreases, and we go into this parasympathetic state. And when we go back and forth between this, what it creates is the slight increase or the slight quickening of the heart rate, and then the slight decrease in the rate of heartbeats. And what that creates is variability. And this is how we measure vagus nerve function most effectively, is through the measurement of heart rate variability. So the heart rate variability measurement is not looking at number of beats of the heart per minute. That's your heart rate, which is a good number to look at as well. I think that's a very valid number for telling us heart health, cardiovascular efficiency, things like that. But heart rate variability is measuring the number of milliseconds between beats of the heart averaged over a period of time. And when we have a lot of variability, it tells us that we have a lot of resilience. Okay, that tells us that we're able to shift between sympathetic and parasympathetic easily and readily. And I like to use this analogy of accelerator and brakes in a car. And that's what these two kind of work as, right? The sympathetics are the accelerator of the car, and that's the fight or flight, and we need it. A car is useless without the accelerator. Not to say that the sympathetic nervous system is a bad thing. We need it. We need to be able to show up when we're needed. The problem is if we don't have the brakes to counteract that. And the brakes are the vagus nerve, they're the parasympathetic nervous system. That's the rest, digest, recover system. And in order for a car to work ideally within the world that we live in, it needs to have good functioning accelerator and brakes.
I
And so
love it.
this is a key thing to understand. So when we have a good flow between accelerator, when the light is green, when we can go, push the accelerator, get where you need to go. But when you get to the red light, you get to the next intersection or the stop sign, you need to be able to slow down, and that requires the brakes. And most of the time, if your car is parked in your garage like mine is, your car needs to be in park. You need to be in that parasympathetic state, or else if it's pushing the accelerator while it's in the garage, we're causing problems, right? So we need to be able to balance between these two, and that's how we measure our body's capacity to shift between these two states, is through this measure of heart rate variability. So the higher the variability, the more parasympathetic function we have, the more resilience we have, the easier it is for us to turn on the sympathetics and turn them off when we need to. And that is literally what nervous system regulation means. The ability to shift between these two consciously through the use of our breath and through the use of our conscious thought focus onto and attention onto our bodies.
I love it. Great description. I think it's going to be very practical and useful for people to understand that. And let's stick to the breath for a little bit. But right before you got to it, you were talking about our relationship and our narrative and how we structure our story and how important that is. And I just didn't want to miss over that, because in my I've been doing this 19 years, but I've been always just trying to find the thread of what reduces and minimizes suffering in my own life and in the lives of others. What's the most practical, effective methodologies that we can find that work through all of history? Even a lot of this stuff's old, like what you're basically describing is pranayama and yoga. And it's
Yes,
been around
exactly.
for thousands of years, but you're taking it from the East and you're basically making it digestible and practical, and you're finding the scientific data to back it. And you start to look at people like logos therapy, for instance, or even Carl Jung's work, or different philosophies of mind and of the psychology. And it's really worked for me over the years. I found out about 6 or 7 years in, wow, this is some stuff that we're seeing that we have to take time to choose our relationship to our experience. Otherwise, it can compound and turn into basically compartmentalization, and you just let things become not assessed or not managed. And so a lot of this relationship stuff isn't necessarily in the moment, like you said. It's spending time outside of that environment where the emergency is happening, and really starting to do, whether it be writing practices, mindfulness, breathing techniques, slowing down enough to develop a story that's most true and most empowering to your circumstance in life. And I've switched my narrative over the years from what a lot of therapists are traditionally trained to teach you, is that you shouldn't have to see that drowning all the time, or that traumatic call. And the way I started to flip it once I read like Viktor Frankl's work and logos therapy was, actually, I'm lucky that I have the nervous system, the body, the life, the tools, all of this opportunity to be highly effective in those circumstances. And then also to grieve and to feel the pain of it, and to allow the emotional response to happen in a setting, a perfect environment for it. And then to grieve and weep and all that stuff, to let it come up and process it. But then the narrative is like, how lucky am I that I can do that job, and that I'm getting paid for it, and that I have a team of other people who can, there's all this stuff that you can really construct a truthful, positive narrative to, that's not just spiritual bypassing or trying to avoid the pain or the real truth about it. It's actually finding the most truthful, opportunistic narrative and plugging that in, which actually has the cortisol and all that stuff goes away. So that's a nervous system management tool as well. And the only way to really do it is to slow it all down and to take
Yes.
account for what's going on. So I liked
And the
that
way
piece
that
where you were,
works, yeah,
yeah,
you're absolutely right. And the way that works is when we're in a sympathetic state, our blood flow actually shifts. We shunt blood flow away from our frontal cortex, our prefrontal cortex. That area is our executive function, right? So where we can really think clearly and come up with and initiate those stories and initiate how we perceive the world and be able to take ourselves out of that situation and be able to literally be objective to that situation, to that moment, is through the use of our prefrontal cortex. It's the thing that humans have that no other living organism has, is the ability to turn on that prefrontal cortex. It's what has developed most latest in the evolutionary chain. And this ability to think, to intellectualize, to be able to say, oh, this is why this is happening. And here's what I can do about it without making it about me and making yourself the subject of those moments. When we're in that sympathetic state, that ability decreases. That ability goes away. We literally stop using a major part of our brain in these major situational circumstances when we're in this fight or flight state. And so for general population, generally for people that have not experienced major traumas to then experience a trauma, turns off that area of their brain. And that's why things like PTSD can occur more readily in certain populations versus others. When we're able to manage this, when we're able to turn on that parasympathetic nervous system, blood flow then shunts back towards that prefrontal cortex. And this is where executive thought, executive function, intellectualization, the ability to separate yourself from that situation is actually increased. That's massive, right? How we intellectualize, how we understand the way that the world is actually happening and tell ourselves that story as to what's really going on. And then to what you've done, which is beautiful, to create the narrative of gratitude within there, right? I'm lucky I get to do this. I'm lucky I get to experience all of these emotions, work through them, and be able to move on past them. That practice, which is literally what gratitude is meant to be, that gratitude practice is meant to be. There are studies showing that gratitude practice increases HRV,
Yep.
increases vagus nerve function. So gratitude practice is saying, let's look at every situation and understand that it didn't happen to me. Maybe it happened for me. And let me learn from this situation and take from it what I need and be able to let go of what I don't need.
Yep.
Right? And know that it just happened and it's objective. And we are not the subject of every single thing that happens around us. And that's such a huge pattern and understanding that if we can start to create more gratitude practice in people's lives, to spend more time understanding that it's not all about us. And let's learn from what's actually happening around us and teach ourselves to handle the world in a more effective and more functional manner, then we can do more with it. We can teach more people. We can spread that love, that joy, that practice to others that need it, and be able to regulate in those moments to say, here's what I can do to support the health of this situation.
I love that. Yeah, gratitude to me is the ultimate medicine. And the only way to really take account, if you want to be the accountant, that's what I always tell my friends and people I love, is that you have to first take account for what's going right first. And you can start with fundamentals like I'm having an experience, something's happening from nothing. And if you slow yourself down enough, because I think the issue of our time, especially in the West, is momentum. And so it's easier to be busy than it is to be still. And one of the
Yes.
fastest, best tools we can use, it doesn't have to be a 30-minute or an hour-long practice. It can be 3 breaths in the morning. And I've dove into the breathwork world deeper than I probably ever should have, but I don't expect people to. I always think you don't have to get obsessed to find the practical fundamentals to learn about what works best. And if I want to teach my mom breathwork, I can show her some sigh breathing or some of that 4-7-8 breathing to help her slow it down. It doesn't have to be this huge practice. It can be 10 seconds a day. And then you start to cultivate that relationship with the breath. And one of the things I learned early on when I was diving into this stuff was that a lot of the breathing techniques are actually causing more harm that people are diving into. Like if you jump immediately into a Wim Hof method and you start doing that over and over again, you're actually compounding this nervous system effect. And it took me some time to really see that as almost just making things worse. Most people actually need to slow it down and to breathe
Yeah.
less. And then I went down Patrick McKeown's rabbit hole and started to learn about
Yes.
Buteyko method and oxygen advantage and all that stuff. And I was like, okay, these competing theories, you don't have to have one or the other, but we definitely should lean into the other and maybe give somebody that fast, powerful breathing experience so that they know there's something there to even feel. But then let's get back into that lower, slower, deeper breathing,
Yes.
because that's where the medicine lies, as a general principle. So
100%. I actually dig into it. So this is my book, Upgrade Your Vagus Nerve, and I really dug into Patrick McKeown's work because I
yeah,
agree. I think a lot of people are, and not to get anything mistaken here, Wim Hof is phenomenal, right? Like, what a ridiculously amazing guy, and what he's been able to accomplish and share with the world. Amazing. But for most people, it's a lot to go into Wim Hof breathing pattern. It's a lot to jump into that. I completely concur. I completely agree that I think the oxygen advantage, Buteyko breathing practice is really the way to get started. To really note where you currently stand and to teach yourself to be far more efficient with your breathing. And so one of the practices that I've dug into is that BOLT score,
yep,
BOLT, the body oxygen level test. And I really love that as a very simple, zero cost, um, easy way to understand where your body currently stands and have an outcome measure to be able to shift your breathing efficiency and work over time to increase how your breathing is working.
I
So
love it.
that's a big one, and I think for a lot of people that's a great place to start, is just to learn what your BOLT score says and to do that practice, like they say, on a weekly basis with those short bursts of breathing practice. We don't need to go into heavy breath work. It doesn't need to be an hour session. I like to do my intense 1 hour breath work session with my friends, with my coworkers, with people that I work with on a monthly basis, right? Like, it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
need to be all the time. It can even be like less often. It doesn't need to be that often. But we do need to be able to catch ourselves in the moments of our day and take that 10 seconds or do those 3 breaths and be able to catch ourselves to say, nope, I'm being a little bit more subjective in this situation. I'm reacting rather than responding. I'm not thinking through what I'm trying to accomplish. Let me take a moment. And this is that idea of just taking that moment, right? And saying, okay, let me pull back. Let me take 3 good belly breaths. So the practice that I have people do is put a hand on their chest, put a hand on their belly, do 3 breaths in and out. Identify what's going on. Am I breathing more with my chest? Is my chest expanding with every breath? Or is it more belly? And then shift my focus to inhale with belly expansion. Okay. And then do 3 of these, 3 or 3 6 breaths, 3 second inhale, 6 second exhale, or 4 7 8, 4 seconds in, 7 second hold, 8 seconds out. I do this with my clients when I'm on a group call, when I'm on a one-on-one call and things are just getting hyper stimulated. We're in this sympathetic state. Let's take a second. Let's do some 4 7 8 breathing. Just 3 breaths to 5 breaths. And it's enough to shift the entire conversation and the tone of the conversation into a much more calm moment, into a much more calm, reasonable, executive function, intellectualized situation. That power that we all have access to this particular power to shift our breath, become conscious, become mindful of what's happening in and around us. That is the power that humans have that we've forgotten that we have. I would put all of my attention, I would put all of our human attention towards adjusting your breath, and everything changes when you adjust your breath effectively.
I love it. I totally am on board with that. And that's why I was so happy to talk to you, because usually when you hear about this field that you're into, almost like the podcast I listened to with you recently was with Peter Stats, I believe his name is,
Yes,
and
yes.
another guy. And
JP
you know,
Ergo, that's
they're
right.
brilliant
Yes.
dudes, but at the end of the day, what you're talking about is free, safe, effective, natural. And it goes back to what nature is, which is incredibly intelligent and old. And you're not adding any devices and you're not needing to buy anything. You're just implementing a practice and you're building a relationship with the breath, which is what I try to share. I do breathing groups now over the years because I found that most yoga studios and so-called spiritual communities are too intense and woo, and there's all kinds of other elements that are almost intimidating for the average person. And a lot of people, especially in my field and just in general, just want to feel better, but they're like, I don't want to go to the studio. Everybody has all this languaging and all the soft talking and all the stuff. So I'm like, how do we strip away the stuff that I'm learning about and just make it practical? And most of my sessions are about slowing down and feeling and practicing being grateful for what we already have. And it's free. It's like we don't have to go and pay a bunch of money and get busier and start going to appointments, and we don't have to implant something into our body which we actually don't know the long-term side effects of, and you don't need your insurance to cover it. And so I like things that are safe, effective, natural, and free, really.
Yeah.
And even flotation therapy was one of my initial tools that I was slowing down with about 15 years ago. But you know, the price point was still not covered, and a lot of people just don't have the time and the money. But that was my introduction to the breath,
Yeah.
because the only thing you can do in the tank is sit there alone with
And
your
breathe.
thoughts and your breathing. And I found it to be the best therapy ever, you know, to
Yeah.
slow it all down. And I still use flotation therapy once a month, and I love sharing it with people. But it's a breathing practice,
It is.
you know.
And this is the crazy thing. If you think of all of the practices that are out there, all of the tools, all of the float tanks, all of the cold plunges, all of the sauna therapy, all of the like the yoga and the Pilates and the exercises and all of these tools, the one commonality that they all come down to is they all come back to the breath. The breath is the key variable that they're all trying to affect.
Yeah,
And so, if we can learn to change our breath, to strain ourselves in certain ways, in effective ways, and then to teach ourselves to control our breath during those stressful situations. For example, yoga. Yoga is a wonderful example, right? We get into ridiculous, contorted physical positions, and the goal is to breathe while you're in that position effectively, right? Even Joseph Pilates had this wonderful quote where he said, if we all learned to breathe more effectively, the world would be a much happier place. The problem is people don't know how to breathe.
right.
And so he developed this practice of Pilates on the topic of creating improved breathing patterns. Sure, the side effect was nice toned butts and thighs and quads. Wonderful. The key was breathing,
That's
right?
right.
Meditation is breathing,
Yep.
right? Cold plunge, get into a place that pushes you as far as possible into a sympathetic state and control your breath while you're in it. Teach yourself to control your breath while you're under a stressful circumstance. Sauna, same exact situation. You're going to push your heart rate up. You're going to get rid of all of these toxins in a very powerful way, but can you breathe effectively while you're in that stressful situation? The key to every single practice is breathing.
I agree.
Controlling your breath is the key.
Yep. I went to my fundamentals yoga class today. I do it on Tuesday, Thursday. It's slow and it's meticulous and it's all about the breath. And
Yes.
this guy's 50 some years old and he's been learning since he was 5 from his dad who was a yogi, but it's all breathing. And he even studies the sutras and all the old practices. But yoga used to start off with connecting with the breath first and then the asanas later. And
Yes.
what's funny about the West is we take things and we turn it into CrossFit and movement, and we ramp things up, which is fine. That's why we have rockets and cell phones and all the
Yes.
cool shit we have. But I think that's probably our superpower is ramp things up. You know, Elon Musk, people like that. But if you want to look at the whole system as an integrated thing, that's what yoga is. It's union. It's connection
Yes.
to the breath and the body and the environment. And one of the things we've missed here, and I actually heard Peter stats again in that conversation. I just wish I was in the room with you guys because there was so much being said, but I'm like, hold on a minute. What about nature? What about
Yes.
sunshine? And lately I've
Yes.
been really diving deep into mitochondrial health, which we can get into because I know you know a lot about it. And they're like the little engines in our
Yeah.
body, and it's like the foundation of our health.
Yeah.
And the number one thing that I've discovered from some really intelligent people, some older scientists and biophysicists and people like that, to take their cliff notes is natural sun. And even when I'm in yoga or I'm at the gym now, I almost feel like I'm doing a disservice to myself, because if I had to choose between doing some push ups in the backyard or some movement in the backyard in the sunshine versus going into a false lit environment, stripping away all of the beautiful spectrums of light, and that's one of the most important subjects I think that's missing from the conversation of physical mental health right now. And it's we are indoors all the time, which is not natural. We're like photosynthetic creatures and we're giant solar collectors. And so now I've made it a point to tell my friends and family and everyone I love, when I find something good, I'm telling you about it, because I just care about people and it costs
Yes.
nothing. So it's like just talking about sunshine more and natural lighting. And I have these neuro lights on me right now because I am looking at a screen, and we could go into that later. But it's like basically just trying to get more natural light into our eyes and
100%.
into our bodies, and spending more time outside. And it's
Yeah.
another free, safe, and effective thing.
It's so huge, and it's so simple that it's so easy to overlook. Right? You're right. In the Western world, we're so good at ramping everything up. We're really good at pushing it to its extremes. When it comes to our health, there's a few basics that a lot of people are really missing out on. And if we were to work on those basics, a lot of our disease situations would probably disappear. The breath is a major one, but can you be in these environments and not be in artificial lighting, which unfortunately I am right now as well, right? Like we're in situations where there needs to be moments of us connecting on junk light screens and having these things around us, but can you break free of that? Can you go outdoors? So after we finish, I'm actually off to a beautiful garden area where myself, my wife, my kids, on this is my wife pushing us to do this, but I'm happy that we are. We're
Awesome.
going with some friends to go through a walk through this winter garden kind of wonderland thing that they've set up nearby. This is wonderful, right? Like, go to spend time outdoors, get some fresh air, relatively clean air versus indoor air, which we know the air quality is an issue. And can we spend time in the sun, under the sun, getting natural light? Can we spend time under the natural lunar exposure to light as well? Right? And our bodies literally have an entire cycle dedicated to the light cycle. Our circadian rhythm is driven by light, right? When the sun comes up, our bodies naturally wake up. When the sun goes down, we naturally feel tired. And if we can take that in and be present with that situation, with that moment, we can shift how we feel and really turn on the ideal, optimal bodily processes that each of us has. There's certain biochemical sensors within each of these things. So when we're in this circadian rhythm, when we're in this biological process and our bodies are functioning optimally through this, we're not eating late at night, right? We're eating at certain optimal times when the sun is up. We're in a moment of ingestion, of taking things in. And then when we go out to go to sleep, our bodies can shut down and go into a recovery state. And that recovery state, it's really interesting. The moment that we fall asleep, vagus nerve activity sparks huge. In that moment, like there was some really great research studies showing that they actually put some sensors on vagus nerves, and the moment that the subjects fell asleep, they had to be rats because you can't do this to humans. But the moment that the rat fell asleep, vagus nerve activity triggered huge, like a huge spike in vagus nerve activity. And then it continued on through the entirety of the night. If we don't follow that circadian rhythm, then our vagus nerve is not given the opportunity to do the recovery work that it needs to do. It's not given the opportunity to send those signals to the immune system to tell it not to be in that alert, activated, triggered state, to turn on the recovery processes that the immune system is able to do. And the light inputs are a major, major trigger to this. So the reason why we all have, we have things like night shift that we can throw on our phone, and blue light blocking sunglasses, right? Like I've got
Mm-hmm.
all these things around. They're around because we want to change how we're taking in the light. It's not the light, but how our body perceives it.
Right. I
And
love it.
so, can we change that? Can we create that filter, that barrier to then turn on these physical processes to allow our bodies to shift out of fight or flight and then into that rest, digest, recover? And the biggest issue we have right now is autonomic dysregulation, the inability to shift between sympathetic and parasympathetic. Because here's the key thing: our bodies cannot heal if we are in a sympathetic state. Healing can only happen through vagus nerve activated parasympathetic activation. We can only heal when our bodies are at rest. That is a key thing to understand here. It's like the key theme of what I'm trying to share with the world is you can you can go in the cleanest diet, you can do everything in your power to take in the best supplements and whatever. If your body is stuck in sympathetic state and not able to turn on parasympathetic activity effectively, healing cannot occur.
I agree. I think light, water, magnetism, connecting with the breath, those are like the free, simple, most foundational components of this mitochondrial health. And that
Yes.
circadian biology, that story that I wish I knew that when I was 21. But then again, if I did, maybe I wouldn't have even chose this profession I'm in. So I'm glad I chose the profession I'm in, and I'm thankful that I know about circadian health now. And I climb up on the rooftop at work on like the big roof way above the bays, which is awesome to catch the sunrise and the sunsets when I'm
I love
there.
that.
And when I'm off, I plan sunsets into my day. I
Yeah.
build my meetings and dates with people around the sunrise and the sunsets. And if they don't want to do it, that's fine. I'm not going to be so obsessed to the point where I can't adjust my lifestyle. But I try to make that just like, hey, it's like drinking water and going to sleep. We need it. And what's interesting about culture in general, especially in the West, is we think we should sleep when we're dead, or rest or stillness is bad or lazy. And I'm grateful that I was able to be a contrarian early on and take naps on my first day off. And I keep my little sleep cycles on point to the best of my
Love it.
ability. And I don't work overtime. A lot of guys will give you crap for that and say, well, you're not doing your best three, which is like to incredibly increase your workload and your shift work. You cannot buy back your health. And you might make an extra 100 grand or whatever you think it's going to be, but your mitochondrial function is dead. And if
Yeah.
I have an investment in my life, it's like, this is the first thing. The first thing on my fleet is my own body, my own mind. And I'm not going to be effective. You can have all the money in the world, and if you don't have your health, you're just missing the point, you
Have
know?
you heard that quote from the Dalai Lama where he said, um, I'm going to paraphrase here because I don't remember exactly the way he said it, but it was, what confuses me about man is we spend the first half of our lives letting go of our health to gain money, and the second half of our lives letting go of our money to gain back our health,
Yeah, I do
right?
remember
Or
that.
shifting these two. It was this very contrarian thing. Like, if you're just healthy from now, imagine how healthy you will be down the road, and the fact that you won't be buying back your time or your health, right? We're going to be able to create this change if we are conscious of our health from the beginning. And yes, most of us probably wouldn't have made the decision to be in the type of lifestyle that we're in had we known this information earlier. But what we can do is teach others and improve the way that they function and try to share our message as much as we can. I think that's ultimately the meaning of life, is to learn our lessons and share with the world.
Yeah. That's why we have this podcast. Literally, I just love
Exactly.
learning and getting people like you to educate not only me, but like to share it with as many people as we can reach and get
Totally.
their cliff notes and try to find, like, you don't have to be a biophysicist or a theoretical physicist. Some of the people I'm talking to, they're way beyond my spectrum of knowledge. But it's like, well, what is the core thing that I can take from them to learn to move forward with like a little more leverage,
Yes.
And it's not that hard. A lot of the stuff that we can do to be healthy is actually free. It just requires a little bit more of a different relationship to how we think about things. And I
Yeah.
heard Krishnamurti's quote, it's similar to Gandhi's, but in a different way. It's like, it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to an insane society. And a
Mm.
lot of our mental health experts, if you call it that, have been indoctrinated to think a certain way because that's
It
what the
is.
institutions and the centralized models have taught them. And a lot of it's driven for profit. And they're not
Yes.
bad people. They actually are just in a paradigm. And
Yes.
when you get away from it a little bit, like you said, and be more objective, you can actually see that it's insane. You know, the way
Yeah.
we approach health is like it's sick care. We're trying to
Yes.
find symptom management, and we're not getting to the core and the root, and we're not trying to prevent cancer. We're not trying to prevent mitochondrial dysfunction and mental health epidemics.
Yes.
And even on the fire department, it's like, these are my guys that I want to see the new people connect with the breath. So we have conversations around nervous system management, breath work. How do you grieve? How do you relate to your story? All that type of stuff. But, it's all we got to do is learn and share. I think
I
that's the
love it.
point.
I love it. Yeah. Couldn't say it any better than that.
Awesome. Well, I know that you got to go soon. You have a beautiful little sunset to catch, but do you have anything that you'd like to share about your book or about what you've been focusing all of your energy on? And also, if you were going to die today, what would you want to share with the world?
Ooh, that's a good question. Um, Last things I want to share, I kind of ended with that really big moment where you can't heal unless your body's in a parasympathetic state. So I think the most important thing is to take moments of time to actively allow your body to enter that parasympathetic state. And using the breath is the strongest way to do it. Costs $0, and it really just is going to add more life to your years. And I think that's so important to fully take home. If I was going to die today, what would I want to share is exactly that quote. You cannot heal in a sympathetic state. In the same way, when you drive your car into the mechanic, you can't keep your foot on the accelerator and have your mechanic fix the car. You need to push the brakes. The car needs to come to a stop in order for the mechanic to be able to put it on the lift or open the hood or do what they need to do. In order for healing to take place within the body, we need to be able to shift to that parasympathetic brakes state. And the breath is the key to do that. And if I was to die today and that was my message to the world, I'd be very happy with that. So I think that's a great one to end on.
It's a great message. I love it. And I'm very grateful for your time and the connection. And I'll be sure to link everybody to your book and all of your other resources at the end of this. So
Wonderful. Thank you so much for this.
thank you. Have a good one. Thank you for listening to the episode. Be sure to subscribe to the show on Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes, and rate the show. I hope you enjoyed the episode.
What we call reality is in fact nothing more than a culturally sanctioned and linguistically reinforced hallucination.